Nava Elimelech was the younger daughter of Makluf and Mazal Elimelech. She left her parents' house in Bat Yam on March 20th, 1982, to visit a friend's home, which was about 300 meters away. She left behind a note to her parents, which had the following message: "To Mom and Dad and the whole family, I'm going to Tali. Don't worry, I'll be back home. I love you very much." Her 19-year-old sister was the last person to see her alive. Nava Elimelech was born on March 20th, 1970, in Bat Yam, Israel, as the youngest child to Makluf and Mazal Elimelech. They already had 3 older children. Josie was the eldest, followed by Jacob. Ephrat was the oldest girl, and when Narva was born, she became the darling of her siblings. Makluf and Mazal were distant relatives. Mazal was sent to Israel at the age of 14 after the abduction of 2 family members by Arabs. To immigrate without her parents, she added 4 years to her age. Makluf's mother and sister brought her along with them. The love between Makluf and Mazal emerged very soon. After marrying, they lived under challenging conditions in Jerusalem, experiencing days without work, bread, or vegetables. The couple reminisced about their hardships but highlighted the prevailing fraternity, neighborly love, and mutual assistance during those times. Josie and Jacob were born in Jerusalem while the father worked at a factory named American Shoe Factory. The factory's closure led him to move to Bat Yam, limiting his family visits to weekends. Eventually, the family joined him, settling in Bat Yam, and after some time, Ephrat and Nava were born. Like her siblings, Nava also attended the school in the same street where they lived. She was in the 3rd grade when she met one of her favorite teachers, a sports teacher and assistant principal. He described Nava's bright, joyful eyes and her aptitude in sports, particularly volleyball, and encouraged her to consider a sports career as she seriously enjoyed every physical activity. Nava consistently excelled academically and socially in school. She was well regarded by her peers and teachers who described her as responsible, diligent, and excelling not just in sports but also in theoretical subjects. Another teacher called her a brilliant girl who was meticulous in writing and who decorated her notebooks beautifully. Nava was well behaved, informed her parents about her activities, and despite being at an age for mischief, was not adventurous. Nava and her siblings hailed from a loving and supportive family and reciprocated this support and trust by striving to be above-average students, endearing themselves to all their teachers. In the summer of 1981, Nava and her family spent time at a hotel in Eilat, where the then Israeli Prime Minister also arrived as part of his bustling 1981 electoral campaign. Nava's charismatic presence caught his attention, and he requested a photograph with her. Being the youngest in the family, her siblings were extremely caring and affectionate towards her. Her relatives described her as a joyful individual whose presence was strongly felt both within and outside the family home. On March 20th, 1982, a sunny Saturday, Nava's interaction with her parents was perfectly normal. Breaking his routine, Jacob, her older brother who was already married, unlike every Shabbat, chose to stay with his wife instead of visiting his parents. By noon, the married couple retired to their bedroom. Nava went out. She left behind a note for her parents which had the following message: "To Mom and Dad and the whole family, I'm going to Tali. Don't worry, I'll be back home. I love you very much. Nava." Nava was deeply rooted in her Jewish traditions and family. eagerly awaited her bat mitzvah, significant for her spiritual and communal responsibilities in Judaism, but she had to wait as she was only 11 years and 3 months old. That Saturday, dressed in red trousers and a matching shirt, Nava was seen by her sister, Efrat, who was across the street with friends. Shortly afterward, Efrat thought she heard Nava calling out but saw nothing when she turned around. Upon reaching home, Efrat informed her mother that Nava was meeting Tali. However, concern rose when Tali called, stating Nava hadn't arrived. Alarmed, the parents immediately reported Nava's disappearance to the police, who initiated investigations that night. In the subsequent days, the police and volunteers extensively searched the region, distributing Nava's photographs, using dogs to trace a scent in nearby dunes, and interrogating neighbors. 10 days post-disappearance, unsettling developments emerged. Some reports claimed a bag containing part of a leg from a young body was found on a beach in northern Tel Aviv and was quickly identified as Nava's. Further body parts surfaced on the shores in the following days, riveting the nation with the gruesome details of the case. Contrary to other versions, it was indicated that 10 days after her disappearance, some individuals discovered Nava's head wrapped in plastic, with other plastic-wrapped body parts found on Tel Barouk Beach. It's indisputable that upon submitting the remains for forensic examination, a pathologist who meticulously analyzed the body parts concluded that Nava had been murdered on the day she went missing. The Central Police Unit of Tel Aviv took charge of the investigation, but not a single clue was uncovered. Lifeguards, boat owners, and regular beach visitors were questioned, yet none had seen a man carrying suspicious bags in the area. Following the murder, the police assembled a team of 40 investigators and detectives who labored on the case for several months, marking it as one of the most extensive operations in the history of Israeli police. The investigation was challenging due to the absence of weapons or evidence at the crime scene. The team interviewed scores of people at various levels and even dispatched some of the severed body parts to a London lab to deduce a likely murder weapon, but all efforts to resolve the case were unsuccessful. Initially, it was speculated that Nava's murder was a revenge act against her family, as inferred by the remarks of the head of the Bat Yam police station. He noted that the method of dismembering the body and discarding it into the sea seemed intentional. The country was in turmoil. People withdrew from public affection. Streets were devoid of children. And Nava's murder, occurring on a serene Saturday noon, shook the nation's peace and revealed a vulnerability. The moment of body identification by Nava's mother was recalled as particularly harrowing. Under intense pressure, the mother was allowed to identify the body, which was prepared in such a way that only the head was visible. The whole identification scene left everyone present in shock. Following the identification, Nava's family organized the funeral. Hundreds from the region came to pay their respects. Investigators held that the killer couldn't have acted alone due to the mutilation and the moving of the body without being discovered. The commander of the Tel Aviv Police District stated that the investigation team was one of the largest ever assembled, involving various specialists. Intense efforts yielded no results, leading to public distress and imposed curfews for children. In 1982, the police focused on sexual offenders, but every lead seemed to be a dead end. Police cadaver dogs, which had smelled clothes Elimelech had worn, led investigators to the home of David Levy, a Bat Yam resident who lived close to the home of the Elimelech family and who had at one time worked with Elimelech's father. In his home, authorities found pictures of Elimelech and her friends. A police search was conducted, but no evidence was found connecting him to the murder. However, Levy was discovered to have taken nude photos of female students at Gordon Elementary School. He was subsequently convicted of pedophilia and jailed. An Arab resident from Gaza was also detained but released due to lack of evidence. Despite various theories, including that of a nationalist terrorist organization's involvement, doubts remained, and after many leads, arrests, and releases, the case went cold. In 1998, police arrested brothers Yehuda and Amos Shelef as suspects in the killing after Yehuda's ex-wife claimed he had confessed to committing the murder to her. Yehuda's home was searched, and his yard was excavated, but no evidence was found. The brothers were ultimately released due to lack of evidence. Nava's mother, Mazal, expressed her continual hope for justice, feeling Nava's presence despite the years past. Criminologist Avi Davidovich theorized that Nava was likely a victim of a serial killer, citing other similar disappearances between 1974 and 1994. He believed it was likely that all the murders were committed by the same individual. He maintained that the police would have had a better chance if they had made the connection with the other incidents at the time. However, he also said that they shouldn't be blamed because the police back then didn't have the level of experience that today's police have. On December 31, 2001, Yitzhak Gatnio, one of the original investigating officers, was interviewed on the Galatz news channel. Following some comments about the murder, he disclosed that the Israeli security agency did find evidence supporting the theory that the operation had been executed by a nationalist terrorist organization. The information came from an imprisoned Arab criminal who collaborated with the agency, asserting that one of his cellmates confessed to killing the 11-year-old girl. This man, a terrorist collaborator, had already been released from jail and fled to Jordan. Investigators disclosed that tests confirmed that this man, a terrorist collaborator, was indeed in the neighborhood when Nava disappeared. He wasn't investigated at that time, and as far as Yitzhak knew, the man had died in Jordan. In September 2010, the police commissioner received a letter reminding him that the 1982 murder of Nava remained unsolved. In the letter, it was highlighted the enduring pain of the Elimelech family, and their sorrow was compounded by knowing that the heinous murder had not been resolved by Israeli police. She asked the commissioner to inform the Elimelech family about which unit was handling the murder case, and requested that the investigative team communicate with her as the family representative to update them on any progress in the murder investigation. The first police response was received 2 days later, confirming receipt of the request and promising prompt action due to the importance of the matter. However, time kept passing, and in 2012, 30 years after Nava's murder, the family was still in immense pain, and all who knew the girl wondered if they had done enough. Remorse consumed a neighbor who hadn't opened the door when Nava rang the intercom, compounded by the family's questioning. Nava's brothers hadn't lost hope of finding the perpetrator. They mainly wanted to give an answer to their parents, who were over 80 years old and were waiting every day for the news of the capture of their daughter's murderer. They said with sorrow that their mother Mazal hoped the monster would be caught while she was still alive, but she was getting weaker and was crying out for a response from the police. They highlighted that the worst part was not knowing where they stood because no one spoke to them honestly. In 2019, another significant event occurred. With court approval, the police exhumed Nava's remains for additional testing. Investigators then reported that they had compiled a profile of the killer, implying that he was still alive, around 70 years old, and was about 30 at the time of the crime. They added that he was someone with a criminal record living in central Israel. A total of 100 detectives were assigned to the case after its reopening due to advancements in DNA identification technology. The investigation was highly confidential. On August 29th, Amos Shelef, once a person of interest in the case, appeared for questioning regarding the crime. However, the reason wasn't clear as he wasn't considered a suspect. Upon entering the station, he declared that his summoning was complete nonsense. His lawyer conveyed the impression that the police were clueless and were merely redoing an investigation that had yielded nothing in the past. He added that the exhumation of the body seemed unwarranted, and the police were trying to cover their mistakes by all means possible. In the 4 weeks since Nava's body was exhumed, the autopsy was performed. However, it did not yield any information that could advance the investigation, as the remains were in a very poor state. During this time, in August 2019, the police gave Nava's parents the earrings she was wearing when she was killed, but did not inform them when or where they were found. One of the brothers said at that time that there was no new information apart from the earrings, which definitely gave them hope, because the police said that once the investigation concluded, they would provide the family with all the answers. Currently, the case remains open, and no new information has been revealed due to a gag order placed on the publication of any details. The police were brief in the information they provided, stating only that the exhumation of the body had taken place recently in coordination with Nava's family. They also mentioned that the investigation was being overseen by the District Attorney's Office of Tel Aviv. In 2019, Mazal, Nava's 90-year-old mother, told the Israeli media that the family agreed to do everything possible to uncover the truth and find out who committed this atrocity. She added that she would give her life and whatever it took to find the person who took her 11-year-old girl away. She also made an important point that she had no idea who her daughter's killer could be, but believed that the friend Nava went to visit, and her mother did know but didn't want to speak the truth. It's true that Tali and all her other friends were investigated, and although she was interrogated repeatedly, no evidence was found linking her to the events. An investigator who was part of the Bat Yam police at the time of the crime indicated that there was a large team of agents working exclusively with the family and friends to follow any lead, no matter how minimal, and they found nothing on Tali. Therefore, he didn't believe that she had anything to do with the murder. Nava's sister stated that they agreed to open her grave because the mystery of her murder lingered with them every day while their elderly and sick parents continued to fight undaunted, waiting for an answer and a resolution. One of Nava's brothers mentioned in an interview that the police had told the family that with the new technology available, progress could be made in the case. He affirmed that they were still clinging to hope because his sister was a kind-hearted little girl, and one awful day their world collapsed with her disappearance and death. Suspects, searches, investigation teams, special research teams, significance, conjecture, speculation, and zero results. The killer or killers have not been discovered to this day. And well, that concludes today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, give a like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This is Unreal True Crime. See you soon. By mid-2009, after 7 years of marriage, Lucy Landry began an affair with Gareth Jenkins, an old school friend she reconnected with on Facebook. She was tired of the 24-year age difference with her husband and his controlling nature, which had left her increasingly lonely and disillusioned. She asked her husband for a divorce and demanded that he, who was suffering from prostate cancer, pay £6,000 for a new flat for her and Mr. Jenkins to move into. The pair started to row constantly over money. On February 1st, in the presence of a neighbor, Lucy taunted her husband about naked photographs he had taken of himself 3 months previously, which she had found on his computer, calling him a pervert and taunting him that he should be on the sex offenders register. That night, they argued violently, following each other around the house, shouting and taunting each other over money, possessions, and Mr. Jenkins. The fight ended in a way that no one expected. Lucy Davies was born in 1971 in the county of Rhondda, England. She was the daughter of Roger and Andrea Davies, who were also the proud parents of another girl named Anna. The family was settled in a small community mainly formed by socially purposed housing. There, against the backdrop of beautiful mountain scenery, Lucy had a particularly happy childhood. Since she and her little sister had similar tastes, they were always very close. Her parents always highlighted Lucy's infectious joy as a standout quality. During her time in primary school, Lucy was known for her outgoing and likable temperament, which immediately endeared her to teachers and classmates alike. In addition to her charming personality, she was also recognized for her undeniable beauty, making her one of the most popular and admired girls at school. Regarding interests outside of academics, both she and Anna loved ponies. Knowing this, their father pleasantly surprised them by enrolling both in the local riding club. This sporting activity taught them discipline and also showcased their talent. Consequently, they earned the right to participate and represent the club in countless events and competitions. Thus, by the start of secondary school, Lucy shone as an exceptional rider. However, her energy and passion were not limited to the tracks, as the versatile young lady began to take flute and piano lessons, dedicating long hours to practice to master both instruments. Her efforts soon paid off, and by the following year, Lucy had a very comprehensive and detailed mastery of the wide field of classical music. Thanks to this, she was accepted into a youth orchestra and also joined her school's choir group. As often happens in this stage of adolescence, a healthy romantic interest appeared in her life, and Lucy became very close to Gareth Jenkins. However, she preferred to keep it a secret. In 1989, after finishing secondary school, Lucy was determined to pursue a career in the musical world. With that goal in mind, she enrolled to undertake a bachelor's degree at the University of Warwick. There, she began her new and promising life, always with the aspiration of becoming a teacher and dedicating herself to musical education. But things did not go as she had expected. While her passion remained, she did not enjoy the direction of the degree program. Consequently, she decided to switch her original plan and opted to study urban planning. It was around this time that she met Graham McAllister. They both discovered quite soon that their outlook on life was very similar. Aside from their love for art and shared interests, a crucial detail in their bond was the extravagant sense of humor that complemented each other. Their relationship flowed naturally, and as they made plans for the future, Lucy decided to introduce him to her parents. For Roger and Andrea, the meeting was wonderful, as they were certain that Graham was the right one for their daughter. So much so that they decided to buy Lucy a house in the city of Coventry, northwest of London. This gesture, in addition to ensuring her a life free from the upheavals of rent and moving, carried their wish for her to start a family. Shortly after moving in, Lucy invited her boyfriend to share the new home. As they continued with their studies in 1995, the young couple welcomed their first child, whom they named James. Lucy decided it was best to take a break from university to care for him. Meanwhile, Graham continued with his university commitments and, to support the household expenses, got a job working the night shift at the city's postal sorting office. Over the months, this dynamic began to affect Lucy, because alone at home, dedicated exclusively to the child, and with many hours away from her partner, a feeling of boredom took hold of her. Then, she found no better solution than to explore internet chat rooms for distraction. In this universe, she sought to meet new people. One night, while Lucy was immersed in lively conversations in various chat rooms, she came into contact with Harold Landry. At 53 years old and of American origin, Harold came from a financially struggling family in Louisiana. However, he understood early on that, Being just one among a dozen siblings, he would have to achieve everything through his own effort and will. Thus, from a young age, he dedicated himself to hard work to escape poverty. His opportunity arrived when he realized that in the oil business, the key was not in owning a well, but in providing the essential infrastructure for the owners of such fields. Consequently, he founded his own company, focused exclusively on the design and manufacture of hydraulic equipment for major oil companies in the southern United States. As he had anticipated, the business allowed him to amass a great fortune, eventually reaching billionaire status. By that time, he divided his time between his eccentric hobbies and a property on the island of Cozumel in Mexico. On a personal level, he had been married and divorced twice. From these unions, he had children whose exact number and identities are not publicly known. What was known, however, was that Harold made sure they lacked nothing. A particularly relevant event occurred in 1992 when, being single again, he met a married woman 20 years his junior. However, neither her family nor her husband were obstacles for Harold, who directed all his seductive strategy towards her and won her over. On February 6, 1994, Harold picked her up to take her for a ride in New Orleans. For this occasion, they hired a babysitter. After concluding the evening, Harold accompanied his lover back to her home and offered to take the babysitter back to hers. No one seemed concerned about the fact that the husband would find out about the betrayal and could act as a wounded man. In fact, that's exactly what happened. Outside the residence, the betrayed husband was monitoring every move of his wife. Once the third party said goodbye, he followed him in his car. A few minutes later, Harold finally noticed the vehicle tailing him. Then, almost as an instinctive gesture, he opened the glove compartment and pulled out the firearm he usually kept. When both stopped at a red light, things spiraled out of control, as the babysitter later narrated. Harold then brandished a revolver at the betrayed husband and fired. The bullet severed an artery in his neck and damaged a nerve leading to a vocal cord. The husband, called Chris Price, collapsed on the pavement with a wound on his neck, but fortunately, there was a hospital right in front of them, which allowed him to receive immediate aid, and the doctors were able to save his life. As for Harold, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The trial against him took place in 1997. In his opening statement, the defense attorney told the jury that Chris had only been the victim of a tragic and sordid affair. Regarding his client, he mentioned that he acted out of fear and in self-defense. The defense's clever strategy led the jury, consisting of 4 men and 8 women, to find Harold guilty of the lesser charge of aggravated assault. As a result, he was sentenced to 5 years behind bars. After appealing, Harold obtained probation. In exchange, he had to pay a fine of $500 and fulfill community service obligations. Although he sought to be completely exonerated, he thanked Pat for his hard work. Since then, they became great friends. Shortly after, Harold and Chris agreed on an undisclosed settlement amount. By the time Harold began talking with Lucy, he was residing in Covington and was still wealthy enough not to have to work. He was also honest about his occupations and everything related to his past life, including love affairs and legal details. But all these elements only served to increase Lucy's attraction to him. What followed was an engaging online romance, with Harold promising her a more than tempting lifestyle. His persistence and persuasive power bore fruit when Lucy finally asked Graham to end their relationship. Thus, he had the path clear, without a rival that could cause him trouble, as had happened with Chris. With the wind in his favor in the early 2000s, Harold traveled to England to meet her, and she took the opportunity to introduce him to her parents as her boyfriend. Although Roger and Andrea were surprised by the significant age difference, they respected their daughter's decisions and did not object to the relationship. Feeling fulfilled and fortunate to share his life with her, Harold spared no effort to surprise her, whether with luxurious gifts or anything else Lucy desired. In fact, by then, he was so in love that he was already planning to propose marriage. However, he didn't want it to be just any proposal. He wished to do it in an ideal setting. To achieve this goal, he took her, along with her son James, and included Graham in the group on a trip. The chosen destination was Mexico, which for Harold was by then his favorite place in the world. Additionally, his longtime friend Pat, who had been his attorney in the past trial, also had an apartment close to his residence, which added to the feeling of comfort. Initially, Harold bought a diamond ring and shared the news with enthusiasm with Pat. Nonetheless, his friend harbored certain suspicions about his future fiancée. Moreover, over the days, Pat found it strange that Lucy had dedicated a good part of her time in the company of Graham. He seemed to be completely blind to it, and ultimately, he proceeded with his plan to propose. Lucy happily accepted the proposal, and in mid-2003, the couple celebrated their union. Shortly afterward, Harold surprised her by acquiring a $1 million property in an exclusive neighborhood in Worcestershire. In this rural setting, the marriage had a prosperous and peaceful start, further favored by the presence of excellent neighbors like Rachel Clark and Stephen Kennedy, with whom Harold and Lucy formed a lovely friendship. Soon, the newlyweds had their first daughter, whom they named Harriet. The event filled both Lucy and Harold with joy, and from then on, he dedicated himself to the little girl with undiminished energy and commitment. Equally important and affectionate was the relationship he maintained with James, whom he treated as if he were his own son. But relentless time began to erode their initial bliss. Gradually, the demands made towards Lucy increased, and her moodiness became directly proportional to her husband's demands. As he saw it, his wife was to constantly adjust to his preferences and adopt a submissive role to his requests. She, on the other hand, had different expectations, so tensions quickly became apparent. As a conclusion, Lucy was direct and unafraid to express her thoughts, and in this dynamic, her husband was not willing to yield. With both having volatile personalities, their arguments often culminated in explosive breakups, followed by reconciliation once the storm had passed. Thus, moments that had once been pleasurable, like the children's vacations, became increasingly marred by fights. Meanwhile, James witnessed the disintegration of his mother and stepfather's relationship. To their neighbors' dismay, the disputes that stretched on for hours became a sort of regular soundtrack. By that time, Rachel and Stephen were aware that the couple had a tendency to abuse alcohol, knowing well that this was the fuel that ignited their shouting and complaints. When Lucy and Harold unleashed all their anger, leading to prolonged periods of not speaking to each other, their neighbors felt peace return. In mid-2009, thanks to social media, Lucy reconnected with Gareth. Having had no contact since their platonic love in secondary school, they caught up and chatted for hours, with necessary interruptions due to both of their commitments. After Harold went to sleep, his wife stayed in front of the screen. Soon, it became evident to him that, feeling unhappy, his wife had resorted to the same escape route through which she had found him, and he had no doubt she was looking for a replacement. However, far from confronting her, he considered giving her some space and traveled to Mexico, where he stayed for a while. Meanwhile, Lucy took the opportunity to invite Gareth to stay with her. In the autumn of 2009, her husband returned to England, thinking this time would resolve their marriage. But as soon as he stepped into the house, Lucy asked him for a divorce. Initially, he felt devastated. Then, after a few weeks, Harold began a relationship. He met this new woman online. She lived in the vicinity, and went by the name of Rachel. Parallel to each of their new romances, the divorce negotiations were underway, and as often happens, new conflicts emerged. Especially concerning the house, Lucy expected to keep it to ensure a roof over her children's heads. For Harold, on the other hand, this matter was non-negotiable. His solution was to offer her money to buy herself a more modest apartment on her own. At the same time, he completely excluded her from his will. Upon learning of the decisions of her still husband, Lucy flew into a rage. Her feelings of hatred towards him made her share everything about Harold's past with her son James, not leaving anything out. Amidst the complicated process and considering the evident tension she was living in, Gareth invited her to spend a few days with him in Wales. Upon her return to familiar surroundings, Lucy no longer wished to disguise or hide her lengthy phone conversations with her new love. Meanwhile, both she and Harold were immersed in excessive alcohol consumption. The arguments escalated to unexpected heights, leaving the children at the mercy of a violent and unbearable atmosphere. On the afternoon of Monday, February 1st, 2010, Harold drank several glasses of wine. At one point, he received a package intended for Stephen. Around 9 o'clock at night, when Stephen returned from work, he found a postal notification indicating that his parcel had been delivered to his neighbor. The Landry's lights were on, so he went there. Harold invited him in and served him a glass of wine. After greeting Lucy and exchanging a few words, Stephen noticed how drunk his host was. He took his package, excused himself, and left. Subsequently, the couple engaged in a nonsensical argument, specifically over a furniture purchase she was planning for their move. James acted as the years of fights had taught him. This time, the disagreement escalated to a physical altercation. In the scuffle, Harold grabbed a kitchen utensil with which he struck Lucy on the cheek. Unable to continue avoiding the facts, James appeared at the scene of the dispute and found his mother injured. He immediately called the police and then focused on securing his younger sister's safety. Not long after, Lucy and her children left the house seeking help. The first place she thought to go was to Stephen's house. However, just as she headed in that direction, Harold caught up to her and, with a knife, caused her multiple injuries. Then he left her under a bush in the garden and walked away. Alerted by the screams, Stephen went outside. It only took him a few steps to discover his neighbor. Although he initially thought she was unconscious, he quickly understood the severity of the situation. At that moment, responding to the emergency call, the police arrived at the scene. They called the paramedics and searched the vicinity for the perpetrator. However, they only found the children, hidden and terrified in the backyard amidst the darkness. Once on site, the paramedics acted as quickly as possible, and Lucy was transported to the hospital. Very shortly after, her heart stopped. Meanwhile, Harold went to Rachel's house and confessed that something terrible had happened, but without giving further details. He then gave her 3 bank drafts totaling $40,000, a sum of cash, the keys to his car, and several signed blank checks. Then he set off back home. By that time, several police patrols were trying to locate him. Eventually, they found him walking along the road and proceeded to arrest him. Roger and Andrea were overwhelmed with despair upon hearing the tragic news. In a statement shared by the police, they asked for respect during their time of unimaginable sorrow from losing their daughter. For now, they had nothing more to say to the media. From then on, all their attention was focused on looking after their grandchildren. The forensic examination confirmed that Lucy had died as a result of multiple stab wounds to the chest. With this evidence and having James as a first-hand witness, on February 5, 2010, Harold appeared before the court and was charged with murder. The trial took place in early February 2011. It was presided over by Judge David Foskett. On this occasion, Pat was not the defender of his friend. That task fell to attorney Andy Childs. Despite the evident difficulty of his task, the defense attorney argued that his client had been provoked by the fury of his wife, who left him no alternative but to act as he did. During his initial statements from the stand, Harold, amidst sobs, stated that he loved Lucy and regretted his actions. He then adhered to the strategy laid out by his lawyer, admitting to involuntary manslaughter because, in his words, Lucy had pushed him to the limit. To highlight the violence of the case, the prosecution presented a very detailed animation of the multiple injuries suffered by the victim. This presentation was shocking to those present in the courtroom. Finally, on February 24, 2011, after less than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury found Harold Landry guilty of the murder of his wife, Lucy Landry, who was 38 years old at the time of her death, while Harold was 64. The following day was for the judge to impose the sentence. He had harsh words for Harold, whose attack he described as indescribable and unforgivable. He also dismissed Harold's claims of possible provocation by Lucy, considering them a vain attempt by the defendant to save himself. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 16 years before being eligible for parole. By that time, however, he would be over 80 years old. Lucy's loved ones thanked not only for the resolution, but also for the judge's remarks, which they felt almost perfectly expressed what they themselves felt. They noted that the sentence somehow helped alleviate the pain of their loss, although they also admitted that no number of years in prison for Harold would bring back Lucy's life, so they would have to work on accepting this painful reality. For his part, Harold insisted on proclaiming his innocence, as he was heard saying he hoped to be able to appeal the sentence in the future. And that's the case for today. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. See you soon. "20 years ago, Rachel, a 21-year-old, was making the 20-minute journey to her home from her parents' house in the early hours of New Year's Day 2003. She had spent the evening celebrating at a pub with friends and family. She had stopped off at her parents' house in Hall Road, North Hull, to get changed into her trainers before making the 20-minute walk back to her flat in Sachs Court, Orchard Park. Her mother pleaded with her not to go because it was too late. But her beloved kittens, Speedy Tomato and Batman, were home alone after her boyfriend had decided to go to a party. Rachel promised to call when she got home. She never did. Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in England, and was the youngest of 4 siblings, having 2 sisters and 1 brother. They all lived together in their hometown. From an early age, Rachel developed a keen interest in music and dance, particularly ballet. She excelled academically in school and later attended a local college to study information technology. However, she eventually decided to focus on her passion for dance. In college, Rachel met a young man named Mark, and they soon started dating. They decided to move in together and rented an apartment in a quiet residential area, which was only a kilometer away from Rachel's parents' home, allowing her to visit them frequently. Rachel also found a job at a local bakery, where she enjoyed decorating cakes. This experience sparked her interest in pursuing a culinary education. In December 2002, when Rachel was 21, she and Mark adopted 2 kittens. They were both very attentive to the pets, ensuring they were never left alone for long periods. As a result, Rachel and Mark always planned their activities to ensure someone was home to care for the animals. This included their New Year's Eve plans, where Mark was to visit his parents and return in the evening, while Rachel planned to go to a bar with her brother to celebrate. On the night of December 31st, Rachel met up with her brother, and they went to a bar, joined by some friends. After midnight, Rachel and her brother left the bar and arrived at their parents' house around 1:20 a.m. Before going to bed, Rachel decided to call Mark to check on him but found he was not home. She reached him on his mobile phone, and he informed her that he was at a party with friends. Disappointed that Mark had left the house and the kittens alone, Rachel decided to go back to their apartment instead of staying at her parents' house. Her mother tried to dissuade her from leaving due to the late hour and concerns for her safety, even though the apartment was only a kilometer away. After a long discussion, Rachel left for home, promising to call her mother upon arrival. However, after waiting for about an hour and a half without receiving a call, Rachel's mother tried to reach her both on her mobile phone and at the apartment but got no response. Rachel Moran's mother grew increasingly worried when she could not reach her daughter, suspecting that Rachel might have gone to the party where her boyfriend was and hence was not answering the calls. After trying to contact her until 4:30 a.m., the mother decided to go to sleep. She woke up around 10 a.m. and found her husband on the phone, hoping he was talking to Rachel. However, it was their eldest daughter on the line, who had been unable to reach Rachel all morning and was very worried. Realizing that Rachel had not returned home, the family began to panic. They tried calling her again, and after some time, Mark answered. He was surprised when asked if Rachel was home. He said he had returned around 7 a.m. and found that Rachel wasn't there. Assuming she had stayed at her parents' house, he didn't think much of it and went to sleep. According to Mark, there were no signs that Rachel had been in the apartment. Her belongings were not there, the bed was as he left it, and the kittens had not been fed. This escalated the family's panic. The family called Rachel's friends and other relatives, but no one had seen her that night. Subsequently, Rachel's parents decided to inform the police. Although Rachel was almost 22 years old and the police might typically wait before starting a search for a missing adult, they decided to begin the search immediately in this case. They inspected her apartment and interviewed all her family members and friends. The police quickly ruled out the possibility that Rachel had left of her own free will, given her background and the accounts of her loved ones. During the investigation, Rachel's mother recalled a moment from the night Rachel disappeared. When Rachel was leaving for her apartment, they had a discussion literally at the doorstep, standing with the door open as her mother tried to convince her to stay. At one point, an unknown man passed by the street. Rachel's mother even considered asking him to accompany her daughter home, but decided against it. After receiving a basic description of the man seen near Rachel Moran's location, the police began searching for him, as he was headed in the same direction as Rachel shortly after her departure. This individual might have witnessed something relevant. Police units were alerted while the search for other clues continued. Investigators started scrutinizing Mark, Rachel's boyfriend. First, it was discovered that there had been an argument between them that night when Rachel found out he had gone to a party. Secondly, during his interactions with the police, Mark did not appear distressed despite his girlfriend's disappearance. These factors led the investigators to consider the possibility of his involvement in her disappearance, prompting them to verify his alibi. Mark stated he returned from the party after 6 a.m. The police confirmed his statement by speaking with people present at the party. Rachel's relatives also insisted that Mark would never harm her. Investigators requested Rachel's mobile operator and bank data and found that she had not used her phone or bank card since her disappearance. At that time, mobile phone geolocation tracking and cellular tower data were not sophisticated enough to be useful, especially over short distances. The police decided to obtain all surveillance camera recordings within a 10-kilometer radius of her route. Patrols were dispatched to each store, and residents in these areas were interviewed, hoping someone might have security cameras installed. Soon, they spotted Rachel on one of the cameras, just a few hundred meters from her residential complex, confirming she was heading home and not elsewhere. The search was intensified in this area, involving search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of officers combing streets, fields, and bodies of water. Streams and artificial channels were drained in the search, but these efforts yielded no results. As time passed, the police increasingly suspected that Rachel might no longer be alive, but the search continued on a larger scale. 2 weeks later, a concerning clue emerged. One of the channels near Rachel's apartment was drained, and her shoe, which she had worn when leaving her mother's house, was found. The following day, a trash bag was discovered in the same channel, containing a woman's purse with cosmetics, a mobile phone, and other items, including Rachel Moran's passport. These findings led Rachel's family and the investigators to believe she was probably deceased, and the police continued scouring the channels. There was a possibility that an unknown perpetrator had disposed of Rachel's body there, but further searches led to no additional discoveries. In the subsequent days, detectives dedicated even more effort to the case, deciding to resort to a popular tactic in England. The police found a woman who resembled Rachel Moran and dressed her in clothes similar to those Rachel wore on the night of her disappearance. They asked her to follow the same route Rachel took, and this reenactment was recorded and broadcast on local television channels. The purpose of this experiment was to find witnesses who might have seen Rachel on the night she disappeared but didn't think much of it, or had simply forgotten. The visual recreation of the scene was successful in jogging memories, and several people contacted the police with their observations after the broadcast. While these testimonies were ultimately not very helpful to the case, the detectives did gain some significant leads. In addition to witnesses, owners of surveillance cameras in the area also approached the police. Initially, the police had received most of these recordings, but some had been overlooked and proved to be fruitful. The administration of a school located about 150 meters from Rachel's apartment provided footage from the night in question. The quality was poor, but the police saw a woman heading towards the apartment complex and, seconds later, someone following her. They suspected this individual might be the unknown offender who could have attacked Rachel. However, the poor quality of the footage prevented identification of any distinguishing features. The police theorized that if the person responsible for Rachel's disappearance was this individual, they couldn't have transported her body too far without a car. They assumed the perpetrator lived in the area and decided to attempt to search every house within a 2-kilometer radius. This required residents' permission and considerable time, so over 100 officers were involved, knocking on doors and requesting to inspect properties. The search began on January 28th, with officers divided into groups, each accompanied by a specialist in property inspection. Hours into the search, one of the teams encountered something alarming at the last unit. The police were allowed inside by a man who answered the door, but initially found nothing suspicious. Before leaving, an officer noticed a small closet used for storing garbage, which was locked. The man couldn't recall where the key was, but eventually found it. When the officers opened the closet, they discovered numerous trash bags, empty boxes, and other objects. As they cleared the clutter, an officer noticed a human foot in one of the bags. Upon further inspection, they realized they had found the body of Rachel Moran. Wrapped in a blanket and tightly squeezed into the closet, which was very low, the officers were astounded at how the criminal managed to fit a human body in there. They immediately arrested the apartment owner, 23-year-old Michael Little, and his friend who was present during the visit. Little reacted calmly to his arrest, while his friend was shocked and confused about why they were being detained. After the arrest, the officers called the chief detective and waited for his arrival. They took Little's friend to the station while Little remained in the apartment with an officer, waiting for the next team. The officer decided to engage Little in conversation, and to his surprise, Little almost immediately began confessing in detail. Little expressed relief at being found, saying he had long wanted to tell someone. He narrated the sequence of events leading to the girl's death, but the officer found his version dubious. According to Little, on New Year's Eve, he saw Rachel on the street, approached her and talked to her, offering to go to his apartment. Rachel agreed, and they went to his place where they drank a bit. Then they argued over something unspecified. Little claimed he went to another room and, upon returning to the kitchen, found Rachel with her back to him, holding a knife. When she turned towards him and cut his hand, he panicked, grabbed a kitchen knife, and struck her, causing her death. The officer doubted the truthfulness of this story, as it seemed quite illogical. Nevertheless, he recorded Little's confession, and Little was soon taken to the station. During the interrogation, Little maintained his claim of self-defense. When asked why he didn't call the police, Little said he was scared and thought no one would believe him, so he decided to hide the body in his closet. Further investigation into Little's background revealed a significant criminal history. From a young age, he was caught stealing and committing other minor offenses. He was expelled from school several times, failing to obtain even a basic education. Little barely worked, stayed at home, and consumed alcohol and drugs. His acquaintances mentioned that Little often fantasized about meeting different women. He once even claimed he was dating a very tall and beautiful blonde girl. Although Little's friends knew he was not actually in any relationship, this detail caught the detective's attention. Rachel matched the description of the type of woman Little often fantasized about, approximately the same height and blonde hair. The detectives hypothesized that Little might have chosen Rachel as his victim based on these characteristics. They also established that Rachel did not know Little, despite living on nearby streets. The investigators reconstructed the timeline of that night and found that Little had been with his friends on the evening of December 31st, preparing to celebrate the new year. However, Little left their company in a rage because the girl he was trying to flirt with had left with his friend. He then headed to another party and left shortly after midnight, following a route that intersected with Rachel's path. Upon reviewing all available facts, the detectives came to an alarming conclusion. They recalled the stranger who passed by Rachel and her mother while the latter was pleading with her daughter not to walk home alone. The police suspected that this man was Little, a theory indirectly confirmed by surveillance camera footage. The recording showed a man resembling Little passing by shortly before Rachel, and in a subsequent recording, an unknown man was seen walking behind her. If this man was Little, he must have stopped somewhere to wait for Rachel to pass and then began following her. This scenario contradicted Little's own story. Further contradictions emerged after medical experts presented their report. Rachel's body had 27 stab wounds inflicted with great force, and she had no defensive wounds, contrary to Little's claim of a fight between them. Additionally, some of the wounds were inflicted from behind and no cuts were found on Little's hands. These facts unequivocally indicated that his story did not match reality. Based on all the available data, the detectives formulated a more plausible version of events. On that night, Little, feeling spurned from being rejected at the first party, passed by Rachel's mother's house. Hearing part of their conversation, he understood that Rachel would be walking home alone. She fit the type of woman he fantasized about, so he decided to attack her or try to talk to her. He advanced a bit, stepped off the main street and waited for Rachel to pass, then began following her. The situation could have developed in two scenarios. Either he attacked her immediately or attempted to flirt with her. In the scenario where Rachel might have ignored Little and walked away, there were several reasons for this. Firstly, she had a boyfriend. Secondly, she would not go to the home of a stranger who approached her on the street in the middle of the night. And thirdly, Rachel was very concerned about her kittens. Upon learning that her boyfriend had left them alone all night, she was focused on getting home as quickly as possible. The most likely scenario was that Little attacked Rachel when she was close to her home and dragged her to his apartment. Criminologists found evidence supporting this theory. There were mud stains on the back of Rachel's legs, indicating she had been dragged along the ground. They also determined that the murder did not occur in the kitchen, but in the hallway, where most of the bloodstains were found and which the criminal tried to clean. Despite all this, forensic experts determined that Rachel had been sexually assaulted, and Little's DNA was found on her body. This indicated that Rachel could have been dead by the time these events occurred. Based on all this evidence, murder charges were filed against Little on January 31st. However, he had hired a lawyer by then and retracted his initial statements, claiming he had not killed anyone. Eventually, the case went to trial in October, where Little's lawyers presented a new version of events. Little now claimed that his friend was the actual murderer. This was the same friend who was arrested with him on the day Rachel's body was discovered but was later released due to a lack of evidence linking him to the case. According to Little, he returned home early in the morning and found his friend and Rachel there. He claimed his friend had met Rachel and decided to go to his apartment because he had the keys. The three of them drank together, and then Rachel and Little went to the bedroom and had sexual relations. Shortly after, his friend burst into the room, angry, feeling sympathy for the girl, and enraged upon discovering their relationship. He grabbed a knife and stabbed Rachel multiple times, then threatened Little. Little demanded that his friend help him clean up the blood and never speak of what happened. Otherwise, he threatened to kill not only Little, but also his loved ones. As one might expect, no one believed this story. It contradicted the evidence and common sense. All indications pointed to Little as the real murderer, with no evidence implicating his friend. The trial concluded fairly quickly since the defense could not present any evidence to refute their client's guilt. As a result, Little was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. If his parole application is approved, he could be released at the age of 58. Rachel's murder was a devastating blow to all her family members, but her older sister, who suffered from diabetes, was particularly affected. The stress of the situation severely impacted her health. After a long struggle, she passed away in 2010, and her family blames Little for her death as well. Thus, the actions of this criminal led to 2 tragic losses. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.